Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Best. I'm the founder and CEO of Seed&Spark. I am joining you from my garage/office in Sacramento, California. This is Nicenan territory. Chances are, certainly if you're joining us from North America, but in most places in the world, you're standing on stolen land. And I highly recommend downloading the app nativeland.ca to find out whose land you're on and make sure to acknowledge them at every chance you get, and get involved with the local organizations that support mutual aid for Indigenous communities wherever you are. Would love if you can post in the chat where you're joining us from. And if you already have Native Land app downloaded, also let us know whose territory you're standing on. I want to thank, first of all, that we have these amazing partners to make this possible. WeScreenplay, Filmshop, the Gotham Film and Media Institute, and Final Draft. We have an amazing deal with Final Draft right now. They're offering 2 free software certificates for 2 of you. So you can check out the Seed&Spark Instagram and Twitter for official details on how to enter. But basically, during and after this event, post your takeaways on social media, and you're welcome to submit 2 entries by posting on each platform, Twitter and Instagram. And the winners will be chosen randomly by pooling together all the participants on both platforms, and we'll announce them on Monday at noon. And so you can share it with your friends who weren't able to make the live session. They can participate in this as well. And you can follow our partners. Again, that's Filmshop, WeScreenplay, the Gotham Film and Media Institute, and Final Draft. And links to their socials will be scrolling across the bottom. So Jess Bendinger is one of, I got to meet her. I can't even remember what is time anymore. And it was like finding an old friend. So let's please bring her to the screen. Jess.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hello,
Hi.
Emily. Thanks for having me. It's so great to be here.
I'm so ddelighted. I think back to that first time that we met.
I fell in love with you instantly. It was
Same.
yeah, it was awesome.
It was, I remember it was like the end of the day. I had been on Zooms, like basically back to back for what felt like weeks. And I was like, oh, am I really going to do this call? And we got on, and I just got this giant lift of energy. And I realized, like, the work that you put in the world is just kind of representative of who you are as a person.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
We're so delighted to have you here. We're going to dive right in. And for the viewers today who are coming to us from Brooklyn, New Jersey, Mozambique, Denver, Colorado.
Mozambique! That's
I know.
Fierce. Amazing.
It's late there, so thank you.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, big time.
Austin, Texas, Philadelphia, Deborah's in Culver City, Lucretia in St. Louis.
Horns up, Austin.
Seattle,
Horns up to Texas.
San Luis Obispo, you lucky duck. London, Boston, it's really Detroit.
Wow.
This is amazing. So,
awesome.
Welcome everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
And I'm so excited to have you here. I'm going to ask Jess a series of questions, and we're going to dive into it. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat at any time, but I will actually shift over to community sourced questions at about the halfway mark. So I will let you know when that's going to happen also. And also, honestly, if something really interesting comes up, I'll just interrupt myself and use one of their questions. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
Great.
Perfect.
So I want to know, like, I didn't ever want to be in the pictures. Like, did you know from a really young age that this was the thing you were going to dedicate yourself to?
In retrospect, yes. I think, like many of us who are, survivors of childhood dysfunction, family of origin dysfunction. I was an only child of divorced parents who went back and forth between Chicago and New York. I went to story, right? That was my safe place. So TV, film, all that stuff. In retrospect, I was much more comfortable navigating and watching those stories than trying to figure out what was going on in my life. So I think I was forged, shall we say, at a young age as a storyteller, as many of us are. And then I think trying to figure out what was happening in the world around me, because I was an only child of divorced parents around a lot of adults who weren't stopping to explain. Very young, as we call it, free range parenting, educated feral, benevolent neglect. You're kind of a kid in the 70s sitting around watching the grown-ups grow up and trying to figure out what's going on. And so writing and screenwriting became a really important path in my own journey, along with therapy and a lot of personal growth stuff. But yeah, just trying to figure out why the world is the way it is and why I am the way I am.
Wow, I was not actually prepared for that answer. It kind of made me, I have a new standing desk situation. I'm a little weak in the knees. Also, the only child of divorced parents.
Oh shit!
Everything. I was like, that's why this is my people.
Yes.
And I can see there's a few folks in the chat who are immediately like, oh yeah, me too. We were forged into this. Which is not to say those of you who had functional families cannot also be successful storytellers, just a different path, I think.
Correct. Correct. I think when you have the security of, feeling cherished and adored and safe and stable and secure, that's such an advantage. So you're at sea level, hopefully, and you can just go from there. And those of us who had more unstable, when you're trying to get your own inner calibration going from a young age, story helped me to do that.
Yeah.
Other people's stories, asking questions was always a safe thing to hide behind as a kid. So it's like, if I'm new and I don't know anybody, I'll just ask them about themselves.
Yeah.
And it served two functions. One, it was to contextualize, screenwriters, really, content is second to context.
Wow.
You are contextualizing. So to me, those of us who come from more, conflicted backgrounds, you are probably a master of context.
Yes.
At 5 o'clock, if grandpa's drinking too much, shit could go sideways real quick, or in this dynamic, that fight's going to happen, or you're hypervigilant.
Yep.
And hypervigilance can lead to great breakthroughs, and that leads to great artists, I think.
Well, it is a very specific, subtle power of observation, right? Where you're not just observing, it's not like Sherlock Holmes where you're like, oh, that thing smells funny. It's like, you can do that, but with like the tiniest emotional cues, right? So
it's your survival. Your survival. It's the fight, flight, freeze, tend and befriend, fawn stuff that we all learn how to do to navigate. Those are great tools for an artist.
It makes such interesting character study, right? Because you understand how someone might subtly convey a very big feeling with a very, very small movement. Which I think is that's really why visual storytelling is so unique, right? Is that you can explain something that might take pages in just a gesture. That's beautiful. So where was the point at which you really turned to what would be like the craft of screenwriting?
Well, as I said in my book, I wrote a screenwriting book for people who hate screenwriting books. I took a class at UC. I studied with Andrew Saris at Columbia. So while I was an undergrad, there was a film school there, but it was a graduate school. You couldn't at that point get an undergraduate degree in film at Columbia at that time. Everybody, it was very much, we have decided what the canon is and you must follow, it's core curriculum. It's like, you're reading a lot of dudes. Yeah. So a lot of dead dudes. So I took a screenwriting class and I did not relate to anything that was being taught. This idea of the inciting incident and all these fancy terms on stuff. It's like we've internalized so much story by the time you're in your 20s, if you like entertainment. It just felt like somebody was being fancy for no reason to be like, I don't know. I just didn't buy it. I was like, there are lots of shirts. There's lots of ways to make shirts. There's lots of ways to wash dishes. Why are you so insistent that this is the only way? And then, so Sid Field's book didn't land for me. I know people love it. I couldn't get through it. Story by Robert McKee. I couldn't get through it. And I know people love it. And I know he's helped a lot of storytellers, but it really felt like some pompous dogma, just pompous dogma. Yeah. And it didn't land.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I'm just going to try this my way and I'll probably, and I'll do it wrong and people will yell at me. And so I did it my way and it was the wrong way, and I figured it out by making lots of mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's not everybody's process. Like, by the way, I was frantically running for my life as well. So you got to picture, in my mid to late 20s, running as fast as I can, fear at my tail, broke as F. And I remember I was like, I can't do this. And I remember the first job I got writing for a French TV series. I was in LA and there was an and I was broke, and there was a happy hour bar with like all you can eat, like hot dogs,
Chicken
like
wings.
crap.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
And I would go there. I would go there every day to eat my all you can eat, probably my biggest meal of the day. I'm not exaggerating. This is what I did. And you could have like $1 wine and all you can eat wings. And so I would just order the $1 wine and I would write it out by hand. And this is the day before final draft. So you guys are mercifully saved. It really, this is mid 90s. I didn't have the money for final draft, even if it did exist. And I was typing everything in justified left on it. And then I would do tabs for character and dialogue. And so that's how I got through it. And then at one point I had to cut and paste my dialogue because I couldn't get, my laptop was broken or whatever I was using. And I had to cut and paste it together and Xerox it.
Wow.
So I appreciate software, I love, bless you, Final Draft, bless you, all the programs that exist. That was not how I came up. And I think in some ways that helped me just push through the resistance because I had to figure out a way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's to me, that's the crux of the independent spirit, right? Is the idea that there's no obstacle you won't find a way around. Like everybody's going to tell you no, the paper is going to tear, the money is scarce, the landlord is shitty, whatever. And that sort of core independent spirit is the workaround. I think that one of the things I think is really important to mention is like there are very different levels of that because there is that plus serious food insecurity or no family backup or, so there are versions of this that I don't think are generative. I don't want to say that like all struggle is generative. I don't believe that. I think there's plenty of struggle that is actually counter to the creativity.
For sure.
But I do think that when you're you get to LA and you're doing the thing, the idea that like there is no that is going to be the end of you, like that has to be kind of at the core of what you're doing. Like, even if you don't have the tools, you're like, well, I'll make them. I'll go to Kinko's or whatever was available to you.
I had no plan B. I was too dumb probably and too desperate to have a plan B at that point. I mean, look, the good news about back then was there wasn't the internet to intimidate you out of stuff, right? It was a blind landing. It was a blind, I was just running and dancing as fast as I could and hoping to make something happen. But if looking back, now what we know about the ladder and patriarchy and capitalism, it was hard. And I did have food insecurity and I was broke. I had a grandmother who intervened. I remember was sleeping on somebody's couch and I'd moved out to LA and I was dog sitting as a way to be in LA. So I was homeless. That's a nice way of saying I was homeless. Yeah. And I moved from couch to couch and traded house care and dog care in order to do that.
Great.
And I called a grandmother finally crying. And I was like, I'm not going to make it. And she sent me $1,000 a month.
Wow.
And that covered my rent. I found a place and that was $800 rent and $200 for food. And I lived off that for a while in order to write. So I was really lucky in that I got a fellowship from my grandmother. But it was hard. It was still hard. I remember getting strep throat and going, and I had just pus on the back of my throat and I couldn't afford to go to the doctor.
Yeah. Well, these
are the trade-offs we make, and I'm not trying to glamorize poverty at all.
Yeah.
Let's not do poverty porn. But if you think I can't relate, you're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's that real additional poverty tax, right? Of getting sick and not being able to get well in time and that costing you time and more money. And these are such real elements.
Real.
And I do think it's really important because the Hollywood mythology is very much like to glamorize that and turn it into the thing that demonstrated that you had the grit to really make it. And fundamentally, when you have a system that's so structurally biased, that's a story that can have people experience structural bias and blame themselves for lacking some intrinsic quality. It's like peak white supremacy. And so I think it's really interesting to hear these stories and also hear someone say this was not great. I'm not advocating for it. It didn't make me a better artist necessarily. It's just like, it was the shit you had to go through.
I think, yeah, thank you for saying all that. It's so well said and accurate. And look, I was definitely inoculated as a child around being able to tolerate certain kinds of bad behavior, right? Trauma in some ways gives you a very thick skin, not in a great way, right? Yep. So I got a certain kind of inoculation to walk through very tough situations. However, it also made me vulnerable. Yeah. So I would say this, as we're all in a phase right now of like, and I'm going to be clunky about how I say this, but it's important to say, you learn certain habits in order to get through and push through. Yeah. And it was shocking to me to find people criticizing me at a certain point in my career for being gruff or loud or feisty, or she's too much, or she's too bossy. There was this real tax I paid that I didn't see my guy colleagues paying. Yeah. And that's because we all have mothers and we've all internalized whatever relationship we have to win it. But the internalized misogyny that I was expected to be, I don't know what, I still don't know what, but not myself. Yep. It was very disappointing. So then you get there and then you're like, oh my God, this person is giving me feedback that is completely devoid of context, which is, I've been fighting to get here and now you're criticizing me. It was very confounding. Well, so what's curious to me is like, so in rewatching Bring It On last night, which I'm sure I am not the only person on this chat right now who did that in preparation for this. My mind was actually sort of blown that in spite of everything that you've just said, you told an incredibly nuanced story with powerful, beautiful, complex female friendships and a kind of female competition that didn't succumb to the like patriarchal paradigm, but actually was about health and growth for those young women. It was about cultural appropriation. It was about like coming out in high school. I mean, it was so many things that buck against literally everything you were experiencing. How the F did you get that made? I don't know. I mean, I pitched it 28 times. I had 27 no's famously, which I talk about in the Bring It On book. I will say this again, that was that inoculation around rejection. I think having had a scrappy childhood, having been thrown into, oh, you're going to this grandparent, you're going to this one, you're going to this aunt, you're going to this uncle, having been tossed around so much really made me good in the room and good on my feet. I also had, because I needed the money, I modeled as a kid. I can't recommend it. Was exposed to, it was, if you want to really kill your self-esteem as quickly as possible, then by all means do it. Yeah. So I was a model and I was used to rejection again, somewhat from that. So it didn't stop me, but I did something to me that wasn't good. Yeah. It went somewhere in me that I kind of sold myself out. Like I didn't matter in the equation. Like self-care was not a hashtag self-care was not a thing we thought about until later. And then you'd wake up kind of trashed and exhausted and sad or depressed or needing meds. In my case, at a certain point, like, why am I so depleted? Well, you've transacted yourself. Right. You've completely gone in and become who everybody needs you to be to sell this story, and you got lost somewhere along the line. But to your point, I think I was really lucky in that my mom played traditional jazz, which is from New Orleans. So and my dad's biggest account when I was in kind of middle school, high school was Popeye's Fried Chicken. So I was a benefactor of appropriation in some ways. I had white parents whose income streams came from wholeheartedly Black culture without in a very unambiguous way. Right. Wow. So I don't know that I clearly internalized it and I clearly understood it, but I didn't know how valuable that was. I loved hip hop, and I know people early on and people were kind of like, huh, that's weird. And it wasn't weird to me. It was like, this is the coolest thing going. So we centered Black culture and revered Black culture in my house in a way that came to be invaluable to me. And that's where I think the DNA of the movie lives, maybe. And it's very unusual, by the way, very, very unusual that I had both those things from both parents. But I think maybe not unusual if you had young parents working in culture. Yep. Black culture in America is where we get anything cool.
Yep.
So maybe, you know,
and
it's everybody's story. We just don't know it.
Very rarely is it actually ethically consumed, right? So, which is like a whole other side tangent.
Well said. Well said.
Some folks we should bring into the conversation. But I was fascinated because I remember the first time I watched Bring It On, and I was like, there was a point in watching it where I was like, oh no, what if the white girls win? You know what I mean? I was really like,
never.
I got to the end and I was like, is this going to be, what kind of lesson could we learn from that? You know? And I remember.
No lesson. It's a redemption story.
But I cried so much because I was relieved. And I also, like, you know, reflecting on it, there is some of that sort of white savior satisfaction a little bit, right?
Yeah. Sadly, yes. Fair.
And so I'd be curious, because we talked about this a little bit before. That movie was radical for its time, and there are parts of it that are radical for now as well. Mm-hmm. What do you look back on and say, like, oh, like this has really changed? Like this part of the conversation has really changed.
Oh, I think I'd need more guardrails around that. That's a big question.
Like,
yeah.
Are there relationships in the film that you would reconsider? Are there, like, if you were to do it again now? I know everybody's desperate. Like, oh wait, would she do it again? And like, who would play them now? Can we have the Cobra Kai version of Bring It On?
Oh, right. I mean, look, I've talked about that, and I actually had a very long conversation with Ian Roberts this summer, who plays Sparky, because look, redemption culture is what I'm interested in. I kind of feel a little robbed when people get called out and go away. The shame and blame around, look, cancel culture in terms of us all coming to, and that term has now been appropriated, as we know, but let's just talk about it as a concept, this idea that you're called out and then have to go away. I want to see them redeem themselves. Like, selfishly, I don't learn anything if you shut the door.
Right.
So what's great about Torrance's trajectory is she's shamed just enough to not be traumatized. She's shamed and guilted just enough to find her moral center and recalibrate. And that's really what redemption is. And we all deserve that. Yeah. We are all going to screw up. Please. Yeah. We hopefully, if it's a life well lived, and I applaud anybody who doesn't screw up, but I've certainly screwed up a bunch, and I want my chance to make it right.
Yeah.
I want my chance to make an amends. I want my chance to learn. And I think we are all depriving ourselves of an opportunity to learn when we can't let the person's learning experience be a proxy for us all.
Right.
So is that fair?
Yes. And one of the things that felt kind of radical to me about the movie and rewatching it last night was, you did a good job of putting Torrance in a position to have been unaware of her circumstances, as so many white people are unaware of their lack of ethical consumption of Black culture or their position of privilege, all of those things. And once she sees it, she can't unsee it.
Yes.
And it changes the trajectory of her life to rectify it. And like, that is where our country is right now.
Yes.
Right. So it felt also really relevant in that way.
Yes. Thank you. I mean,
I'm curious about what were the most like unexpected consequences of getting to make that movie, which seems like very from your heart.
The most unexpected consequences, huh? I don't know. That's a great question. This didn't land right away. This took me a while to understand. But so in going back to all the times I pitched it and all the passes I had, you were talking about that resilience of going back. But what I learned later, which and I was kind of shocked. I got a lot of work in the teen lane and in the young adult lane after that. But like the level of exponential success of Bring It On, I think I was very disheartened that, look, Hollywood is a place for data refugees. They are very data averse for lots of reasons we can get into. I'll say, wow. They don't want to look at the facts.
Yeah.
And I think Bring It On was a very inconvenient fact. And I wasn't in the success of the movie. And in the pain of certain things that happened in the aftermath of the movie, for me personally and professionally, it took me a while to realize, oh, this was an outlier. And the reason I'm not getting the same level of offers is because nobody bet on it to begin with.
Uh-huh.
And that that took me a while. I think I've only just realized that in the last couple of years. And similarly with Stick It, it overperformed by insane metrics. I mean, it was #1 for 7 weeks in a row on iTunes. It came in 2006. It came out in 2008 and went to #1 again on iTunes. It had 40 million downloads on YouTube. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's insane. Okay. Yeah. By any standards today and then back then. And nobody was like, hey, want to direct another movie? And why was that? Well, it was an outlier to them. They didn't understand it fundamentally, that this social justice, this idea, this medicine in the candy, how that worked. They just couldn't fathom it.
Right. It's interesting because like you could be at this moment any woman who made a movie in the last decade or two that performed well, and every single one of them was told it was an outlier. And if you take them all in aggregate, you're like, talk to me about this outlier thing. Like, talk to me about what you mean by that. So now
what do the agencies look like, and what do the studios look like? You know, and I was working with the 538 briefly on they were trying to redo the Bechdel test. I'm blanking on Walter Hickey was the writer, and he did a couple pieces on it. And I sat down with him for a long time trying to explain to people. So the Bechdel test is very late in the process. If you're looking at a movie and analyzing cast, you're too late. Where you need to move the pipeline to before the script is written.
Yep.
And when you really move the pipeline back and look at the complexion and gender of agents and the complexion and gender of agents' talent lists and the complexion and gender of studio executives. Now, studio executives will often have women because there's a lot more labor, quite honest. You know, there's labor. So there are lower level women who will do the employees who will do the labor for the executives who never leave.
Yep.
So there are these ceilinged positions of privilege at the agencies, at the studios, at the distribution platforms. And there's a high burn rate underneath it because you see quickly there's a ceiling here. Oh, this is, look, we work in the land of make-believe. So why is it so surprising to us that a lot of it's fake? And that the virtue signaling is a big commodity in Hollywood as well, versus really doing the work.
I thought it was really interesting that, this most recent round of research that's been released about the backslide that has happened in 2020 for women specifically, the really marginal progress, if any, that has been made for people of color, specifically Black people, specifically after this year, and that the agencies continue to be 90% white. And what was interesting to me about that is I recalled a story that a friend of mine told me. He's a very talented and well-regarded composer. He's a person of color. And he got a call from a very famous director who was doing a very big show on a major premium cable network, which he brought to his agents as a layup to just negotiate and close. And what did those agents do? They pitched their higher paid white client against him on a job that he brought to them because that would bring them bigger commissions. Now, fortunately,
it's a commission-based economy. So let's be clear. You're absolutely right. That does not surprise me.
And so I think there are all these mechanisms internally where it is not about data. It's just about very specific data, which is, what is the commission I'm going to pull off of this, and who on my roster right now is commanding the rate? So it's self-perpetuating, right? So if those white actors on my roster are pulling the biggest rates, I'm going to continue to put them forward and package stuff for them because that makes me more and more money. And it's very hard to break that cycle.
That's a great point. But the commission is one data set. I'd say commissions and fees are one data set, and that's a very crude and coarse data set. And and that's sophisticated as it gets. It's not more sophisticated than that.
And I want to not spend any more time here because I can already see people raging out.
Sorry.
Because, no. The reason that this is important to talk about is like, I really think it's important for creators to understand how structural some of these challenges are and what a long lens we have to take on them, and why it's so important to really like pull your
I would like to pause here. I like where you're talking. Can we talk here for a second? Because there's something really that might be helpful to people that we should unpack about what you're saying. Really well said. Listen to Emily. She's brilliant. There is a big dirty secret in Hollywood beyond gender and beyond race. And it's around labor. And Hollywood relies on an enormous, and I mean enormous, and please somebody, please measure this. I will help you. It is an unpaid labor market. There is an enormous unpaid labor market. Let's walk through how this works. My agent calls me. Who is paid? My agent says to me, I want you to pitch on this project. How many people are in it? Is it a sweepstakes? Is it a cook-off? What's happening? I won't do it if it's a huge fishing trip. But let's talk about it as if it is. Oh, we don't know. That means a lot of people.
A lot of people.
So let's say there are 10 writers pitching. Now, I may be unusual. I don't think I am. But at the front end of planning a series or a movie is like a blueprint. It is architecture. It is a huge effing amount of work. Let me not understate that. I am sure there are people who can pitch and they're like, they're really good at pitching and can do it on the fly. Like, I'm not one of those people. So you're asked to do a huge amount of free work.
Yep.
Whose P&L is that going on? Who's getting the profit? And so when I don't get the job, that's a loss.
Yep.
So I've spent a week, 2 weeks, endless calls, working for free.
Yep.
I don't get the job. Where does that number live? Because that number on any time there's a commission involved or it's a job, a project the studios want to make, the amount of free labor is insane.
Yeah.
And nobody talks about that. And so you have to be able and willing to do the free labor involved. And then we get into a whole other thing of privilege, right? I mean, the unpaid labor market in Hollywood is disgusting to me. It's disgusting that people making salaries this industry has this trend of feeling entitled to ask for all this free work.
You know what's interesting? So there's a trend in tech now, because it used to be that if you were going to apply for an engineering job or maybe a design job, for example, you'd be given a challenge, right? And so, like, I don't think it's so terrible to like need to test someone's very real skills in an hour, like the time it takes for an interview. But I would learn that some of these challenges are a week's worth of work. And that is for a position that you will not necessarily get. And the pushback on that in tech has been so severe that oftentimes people just demand pay for that. It's like, yeah, I will do that, but you're gonna pay me for that time.
As well they should. Well they should if they're experienced.
So you think about how much more meticulous are you about the pool you're drawing from, and you think about so a tool like the Blacklist is going to surface already written scripts, so that allows us to pull from a wider pool. My fear, of course, is when we start narrowing the pool quickly and paying for the labor, which is kind of what happened in 2020, meaning like there was a huge narrowing of the available work. And what happened? Women and people of color got pushed out, right? And so basically what the system is telling us, the information the system is giving us is free labor or less opportunity. And that is a Sophie's choice right now.
Well, I would say this. I think it's both and, sadly. I think, yes, your point is well taken, but the free labor market doesn't go away when there's more work. I think the free labor market is the unpaid labor market in Hollywood is the biggest fucking secret going. And if that got analyzed, I mean, first of all, the legality of it is very questionable.
Yes.
They're violating labor laws left and right, not just for writers and talent. I mean, because it's the dream factory, you know. I saw somebody great on BuzzFeed who was working for the the culinary part of BuzzFeed where they do the quick recipes.
Yep.
And he was like, thanks for all the experience coupons. I couldn't buy anything with them, you know? Ooh. And it's like, he worked for free and was really understandably pissed off. BuzzFeed had monetized that, right? So it happens a lot in digital. We know this happens because they're offering us the chance to work, you know, and it's, everybody wants this chance, but that's where the exploitation happens, right?
Okay. So I know that we could fill up an entire hour together. And so I want to be conscientious of
to be continued. Sorry.
No, so there are two places I want to go, and then we're going to open to questions. I promise everyone. I'm sorry. It seems like this is valuable to them. Nobody's been like, Dix, answer my questions. So my first question to that is, talk to me just at a high level about the rights of writers and how to protect, because what you are talking about is fundamentally your labor rights. And what you're saying is there's a whole piece of this market that expects a high level of exploitation.
Yes.
And we've been in a very interesting last year and a half for writers' rights. Yes. So I'd love to hear more about that. Like how are writers now better protecting themselves, and what are the things to look out for, especially when you're entering? Well,
I would say, look, unfortunately, the Writers Guild of, the writers traded their rights for copyright with the studios and the networks a long time ago. The UK, there are a couple countries that allow the producer to control the content. I believe the UK still does. I don't remember the name of the law. But if you sell a pitch, the studio owns it. Now, J.K. Rowling, controversial person to bring up, but like, she wrote a book franchise and she owns the franchise. She has a huge amount of agency autonomy and money that goes with that, as does, the 50 Shades of Grey franchise. Like, when you write it as a book, which is underlying IP and copyright, you own it. So there's been a lot of, I always tell people, make the graphic novel. It's way more valuable than the screenplay. And then if it does well, you control the IP. So I think anytime you can't, now look, just because you've made it as IP doesn't mean anybody will want it. You still have to make something people want. And that can be hard to test if you don't have audience.
Right.
So I would say I'm really loving, a lot of the creators on TikTok, because it's just undiluted. It's just like they're communicating, they're who they are, they're in their lane. It's what you see is what you get. I'm sure there are problems with TikTok, but for the sake of this discussion,
sure.
So you want to find yourself owning your IP when you can, and doing it in a way where you are protected. And graphic novels and novels do that far better than selling your screenplay.
Wow.
And unfortunately, the screenplay isn't a format that is easily consumed historically, or that people,
Right. You can't sell that as like a book. Like, that's unless it's already been made.
I've thought about it. I have some unproduced screenplays that I honestly have thought, like, screw it, I'm just going to publish them and own them. But people want you, can you do it in book form? I don't understand the format. There's a lot of like hemming and hawing about, does it work as a format in and of itself? I love it because it's like a haiku, but so I don't know. Is there a market for unproduced screenplays? I don't know. Not really.
Right.
But if you can protect your IP somehow, I'm always a fan of that.
Yep.
However you can do it. It may not be meaningful from a purchaser, just because you've done it. Right. A, doesn't mean it's good, and doesn't mean anybody will want it. But if you've done it and you can build audience around it, then you have an argument and a case to make.
Then you have a real asset that grows as the sort of franchise grows, and as the other pieces of development grow. I know, like, that's something that Mark Duplass has come on here and talked about a lot, which is like, make it for cheap, own every part of it, build a library, so that when you 10, 20 years into your career, which is when most people actually then really get well known, you can sell that entire library, and that's your nest egg. Like, that's what you and all the friends who own points on that, who helped you along the way, that's when everybody gets to like buy their house and like rest a little bit easier, right? So I think that's such an interesting that IP ownership piece. It's also why I staked everything on crowdfunding, right? Is because crowdfunding is an amazing way to allow you to produce something where you own 100% of the IP and the audience that goes with it.
I did a podcast and we own the IP, we control the underlying rights on it. And now we're going to probably spool that out into doing different cycles and different, we'll do different seasons about different people, hopefully for a while. And that becomes the pitch. And so now I'm being paid for my pitch and my storytelling ability in a completely different format. Awesome. But it paid off, right? But it worked. Yep. it was a heavy learning curve.
Yeah.
And we had really expert partners, you know, and it was expensive. You can't just throw it up there. It was like $250,000 to do the first season of Mob Queens, and that's conservative. So, you know, and we researched it for years, but we tried to sell it as a TV show. We could not. And then lo and behold, it's a podcast. We have 6 inbound offers without one pitch. And the rest hopefully will be history.
Exactly. Carrie Spain, IP means intellectual property. So that's typically the copyright among other pieces. But IP is intellectual property. And thank you so much for asking that question.
Yes.
I think it actually is really brave to ask that question in this context. And I'm sorry that we are the assholes who just like blew right through that without an explanation. It's like the thing I hate the most. So the last thing that I want to talk to you about is, so we're talking about rights. We just had this really interesting conversation because you brought up data. And we live in all of this that's happening right here. All of this is just data flying back and forth. What role, because I know you've talked about that, like from the very beginning, like you had the data to prove that you should have been directing everything for a while. Like where's the future of that now?
Well, I haven't read Cassandra Speaks, by the way, Elizabeth Lesser's book. I just heard her on Tim Ferriss, and she talks about the power of matriarchal storytelling and that what happens when women are centered in their storytelling. But how I think about story is slightly different than my colleagues. And I don't know why that is. But I'm very audience focused. So I'm actually thinking about the audience first. And it's probably something to do with my childhood and having to pay attention and do that kind of whiplash. But I really want to find, so it's like my own version of sabermetrics, ratiometrics, Moneyball. I am thinking about, where am I seeing people paying attention to something? Mm-hmm. And where do I have a feeling there's a cool story there and that they're underserved in some way? So I want to find a highly engaged, underserved audience. Yep. Whatever that looks like. Yep. And your hashtags on TikTok, if you want to do like the short homework, those are kind of crude versions of what I'm talking about. Absolutely. So for Bring It On, it was cheerleading. I saw these competitions back to back on ESPN. Yep. I was like, so noted. Went to one. I was like, whoa. Went to a camp. I was like, whoa. It was all ages. It was a phenomenon. Yeah. And I loved it. I just thought it's so daffy and weird. Only in America can we turn the thing on the sidelines into the main event and make a competition out of it. It's just so, right? It's unbelievable. So that checked all the boxes. And then you have to make a good story. And then you have to try and find your two great tastes that taste great together. It's like, you can't just write a movie about cheerleading. It has to be about something. So I'm always looking at what is it really about really? Gymnastics, similarly, ratings beat the Super Bowl every 4 years with the Olympics. That's a really interesting piece of data if you're paying attention.
Wow.
What is that telling you? Right? There are these people desperate to see something and they only have something once every 4 years. So I used that and I love gymnastics as the magma out of which Bring It On grew. I was a gymnast. So yeah, it was like, okay, then what's the cool story about girls in pretty little boxes? Right. And how can what's the unexpected thing? Rebellion. Right. And kind of family trauma, right? Hidden in a redemption story, right? She's kind of canceled. Yeah. Understandably for letting down her teammates and her country. Yeah. And then she has to redeem herself. Yeah. So I'm always looking for that. That's kind of an unpacking of it. Where is the audience? Who are the audience? Okay, I am in the audience with you, and then I'm going to make this cool thing for you. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I do think part of what we're seeing now is a very interesting rise in underserved audiences becoming creators. Which is fantastic. Right? They're basically like, I'm sick of this shit. I'm going to tell my own story. And it's, I think it's such a crucial moment because now we actually all have the authoring tools, at least to get started. Right? Oh, like, the tools have been democratized big time. Are you kidding me? Yeah, it's a great time. The tools to get started. I don't want to lean over into the sort of like, you can make an iPhone movie that competes theatrically. Like Soderbergh can do that. Like not everybody can do that. But I do think that. But you can try, and trying and failing. It's never been cheaper to try. Yeah, that's right. So we do have 13 minutes left, and I really do want
folks to be able to ask some questions. And I think, so, oh my God, there are great questions.
Awesome.
So one of the questions is, do you think there is, do you have experience representing characters with mental health issues?
Well, yeah, I mean, sure. I think, first of all, I wrote a musical called Psyched, which I was unable to get financed. I had financing briefly in 2017 and then it fell through, and it's been a real heartbreaker to get that made. But yes, because my hope was, holy shit, there's so much, we're becoming so aware of being neurally divergent, of having emotional differences. Is there a way to tell this story humanely and inclusively? Right. And it's a hot potato. Nobody wanted to touch it. It's obviously a hot potato. You're dealing with heavy stuff. So I have tried. I haven't made it yet. I haven't succeeded. I tried to do it as a musical. I didn't see Sia's recent effort. I know she took a lot of heat for that. I think it's a touch, and I was like, oh yeah, it's touchy. It's, can you cast it? Can you be inclusive in the casting? Can you be inclusive in the making of it in a way that isn't pinning the butterfly on staring and going, ooh, look at that. But really making it from a place of empathy and inclusion. I don't know. Yeah. And it was challenging, and it was too much of a hot potato, sadly. I would love to make it at some point. And I would love to constellate it with some wonderfully talented people from across the spectrum, literally. I think autism, what we're learning about the gifts of different conditions is just remarkable, and to destigmatize those and really destigmatize conditions, because let's face it, we're all suffering from a mental health condition, and that's called life. Yeah. So, I mean, I would love to do it. And yes, I am a fan of anybody trying to do it. It's challenging to do it with empathy. I think
that, and also it not being the catalyst for the conflict always necessarily, right? Like I think that's a common trope that we see, is that the mental health condition is the problem that we're trying to solve for, which sometimes can be true when told with empathy, but is also sometimes like the bad guy. And that's not really the way that we're trying to tell a story right now. The other thing I was going to say that is interesting to me is just there were some folks talking about book recommendations. I know some people in my life whose lives were absolutely changed by the book Neurodivergent.
I haven't read it yet.
They felt themselves sort of like seen and sort of characterized in a way that was really freeing for them. So on along with the book recommendations that have been happening here, Neurodivergent is another one I would answer. Scarlett asked a really important question. Yes. How do you balance the writing that pays with the writing you really want to be doing?
Yeah, she asked the question. So, I'm speaking from a place of privilege. Like, I've been in the business for a long time, and, but last year, like, there wasn't, look, 32 billion lost, 71% contraction in the movie business. Yeah. And that's been going on for a while. That's not new. How do I balance it out? I probably don't. I probably am much more human and fractured about it. I'd say I work on things, like I worked on the Bring It On book. I didn't know if anybody would buy it. That mercifully it went to #1 in its category really quickly. And it's been a nice, like, making, but very modest amounts of money. It sells 10 copies. I make a little bit of money. It sells 20, Yeah. So I'm trying to create revenue streams, and the residuals revenue streams don't really, they're drying up. Mm-hmm. So I'm on that journey exploring as well. Like, I'm probably going to shoot a commercial. I'm going to direct a commercial next week. So I just take jobs as they come, where the people and the messages align for me. Mm-hmm. And I feel fortunate, and I live way beneath my means. I think it's just probably poverty consciousness from being a struggling artist way back when, but I try to save it for a rainy day when I can. And, it's not, I remember doing jobs. I tried to go, when I was working in between jobs more regularly, I would try to do the highest, I would try to find the job, even if it wasn't, if it wasn't comfortable. So I worked in a bakery from 5 a.m. I did like the 5 a.m., almost night shift. Mm-hmm. But it paid $25 an hour.
Wow.
So showing up at 5 a.m., it was worth it for me to get up at 4:30.
Yeah.
Work from 5 to 10, be done, and then I could write the rest of the day. Yep. So it's really finding these things. And there's so many, from what I'm seeing on TikTok, and there are tons of gigs online and ways to make money. I don't know if they're all hoaxes, but it looks like there's some innovative ways to try and make money. And I would just try and make it work for you if you can.
Yeah. I waited tables for 17 years.
Oh, wow. That's a long time.
It is.
Do you like people? Do you like people though? You must like people to do that for 17 years.
I love food. And I figured out at some point that if you work at places that serve really, really delicious food, people are often cooler because you're bringing them so much pleasure, and then they like reflect that back on you. I had only a very few shitty experiences. I was also, if I may say so, a fucking good waiter. Like I'm a good waiter. But you know, that's what 17 years will buy you. Yeah. This last year, my heart broke because I know how many people were like me, where the reliable money came from waiting tables or bartending or back waitering or delivery, or whatever.
Waitering, all of that.
Like I relied on that.
I was a bartender. Yeah, I was a bartender. I hear you. And I needed those transactions. I needed those exchanges with people. Like that energy gave me a lot. Yeah. And it helped get me through the lonely days of writing as well. Yeah. You know, I can't see myself becoming an OnlyFans foot model at this day and age, early dated life. But, you know, I mean, I'm seeing lots of innovative ways people are making money. I'm like, wow, I might have been an OnlyFans foot model back in the day. Who knows?
I'm here for all of the options that fit within what you're comfortable with. And also maybe that, like, you know, push your boundaries in an exciting way. I just want to appreciate all the people who remember the shift meal, the family meal, that food at the restaurant that like you would take home at the end of the night, and it would be a second meal because you really needed that. So a question that I think all writers want to know about all writers is like, how do you set aside your time? What's your writing schedule?
Right now, it's not great. The pandemic, the free floating thing of the pandemic has been challenging, but I'll say I'm really good in the morning when I can hit it, like get up, coffee, walk the dog, let my thoughts flow, and then just kind of sit down. Mm-hmm. And the longer I wait to do that, the longer it takes for me to get back in that cadence. Yep. But I do have a pretty hardcore, I wake up, I meditate in bed. I just go right to meditation in bed. I, do a stretch, a coffee, and I do morning pages. So I do the very corny, what am I grateful for? What would make today great? What am I working on? Yep. Is something rattling around and bothering me? Yep. And then, how are you feeling? I ask myself. And what do you need? Yeah. So I try to check in with myself to know how I'm feeling and what I need early in the day. And that helps me feel like, okay, I can do this now. Right. Because so often I didn't do that, and I was a grinder, and I got my body racked. I would forget to eat. I need to remind myself a lot. I need alerts. I don't do well when I'm in sacrificial lamb mode with my writing. I need a glass of water, a snack, a sippy box, you know, like I got to take the kid out of the driver's seat and go like, put her in the car seat. Here's a sippy box. The adult is driving the car. Wow. I can get a little manic, a little too manic, and a little too on the fumes. Yep. And then I'm like, oh, my side hurts. I've been in this position and I didn't drink any water, and I got to pee and I got to eat at the same time. You know, everything hits me at once and I'm a wreck. So
this is a little too, yeah, I have to say I feel attacked, actually, is how I feel. The other day, you know, my husband has been like full-time dad in the pandemic so that I can continue working. And he's usually in the house, and he fixes lunch for the kids and brings lunch in to me so that I can keep working. And the other day he wasn't here during lunchtime and like had to send me a text message, like, don't forget to eat. And then it was 3:00 and I was like, I forgot to eat. Yeah. So I really, and even as somebody who is taking actual children and putting them in car seats and keeping them watered and fed, and my many houseplants that I keep water and fed, I think that's really incredibly important advice, and actually a really special visualization right? Is to take care of that child, right? That needs care, that child that didn't have a lot of parenting. Right.
You're writing, and for me to remember, I'm not writing to impress her. I'm writing to take care of her.
Wow.
And I think Hollywood really put me in a zone of needing to, and I was so starved for all the things. And it's such a dangerous place to live, right? You're living outside of yourself all the time. And we all, I don't know, I do it. I fall into it all the time, you know, performative, like people pleasing. As women, I want you to like me.
Yeah.
And it's such great cost.
I don't think we can go anywhere from there. Like that was it. I don't write to please her. I write to take care of her. That is why art, right? Is that when you write from I'm sorry, that made me feel really emotional. When you write from a place of that level of intentional care, that's how people feel when they watch your work.
Thank you.
That's really special. I can't, because now I'm gonna
please, me too. You know,
amazing. Jess, you are the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And your community is the best. And reading these comments has been just a tonic for my heart. So thank you, everybody.
So delightful. Make sure to pick up the Bring It On book. A book for writers who hate writing books, which is so
a book for screenwriters who hate screenwriting books. Yeah.
Well, I think my first impressions getting through the first couple of chapters was like, I'm going to send this to my mom, who primarily writes novels, because I think it's broadly applicable in so many ways.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, you guys.
They're giving you spirit fingers. I just want you to know that's happening.
Thanks, guys. That's so sweet. So sweet.
And I will tell everyone, thank you so much for joining, for participating. Please do. They're all dropping their Insta handles. Follow each other. Support each other's work. I
answer DMs on Instagram, so please feel free to hit me up on Instagram.
So if you have additional questions for Jess, you can hit her up on Instagram. Thank you again to all of our partners. And if you're interested in the Final Draft software giveaway, enter the giveaway. Find all the details on our Instagram and our Twitter. And we have some events upcoming. This one's really important. Stretch That Buck. Film Budgeting 101 on Monday. This is a brand new workshop. Everybody needs it.
Yes.
We're teaching Art of the Pitch next Friday. And all of our upcoming events are listed on our Eventbrite, and we'll link that in the comments as well. Thank you. And I just want to say a special thanks to Shayna, Megan, Julie, Danny. Oh my God, am I forgetting someone? This is terrible. On the creator team, our creator success team, who is crushing it every single day. Thank you all so very much. This has been beautiful. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Take care.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.